Great. Welcome to Activating Allyship today. Thank you, everybody. A big warm welcome to you, to everyone who's dialed in and joined us for the session today. My name is Sarah Liu. I'm the founder and managing director for the Dream Collective, and I'll be your moderator for today, and I'll be facilitating the discussion. I believe we've got people joining far and wide from all parts of the world. So wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you. I've got two incredible speakers with me today, which I look forward to introducing them to you very shortly. But just wanted to let you all know that we will actually be opening up Q&A throughout the session. So at any time of the next hour, feel free, if you got any comments, questions or thoughts, feel free to actually pop it straight away at the Q&A function. Don't need to wait, don't feel like you need to wait until the very end. Really excited to be introducing to you a little bit more about what we do here at the Dream Collective. We're a global diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy. We operate really across the JAPAC region and predominantly working with technology clients to help them solve three problems. And that's to either attract, retain, or advance diverse talent. And where we really get tapped on the shoulder and what we call our zone of genius is in the gender equity and gender inclusion space. And over the past couple of years, with the great work that we've been doing across the JAPAC region, we've actually been selected as APAC's top 10 DEI consultancy in the region. And with great leadership and recognition, it comes with great responsibilities. So a really big part of what we do here at the Dream Collective is always thinking about how we can not just do great work with our clients and us as a business, but how can we drive true progress forward? How can we actually move the dial and really make sure that, you know, gender equity and diversity inclusion is commonplace across the board? And so we'll be spending the next hour together, and I've introduced myself. I'm really excited to digitally meet all of you today. And we've got two incredible leaders with us today. We've got Michael Kim, MK, head of HR JAPAC at Spotify, and we have Ingrid as well, senior account executive from Adobe. Both Spotify and Adobe are actually clients who we are working with, and really excited to be on that journey and have that shared experience that we can bring to you today. I know that most of you here in this digital room today probably would have heard about the research that we conducted in September, October this year. And that's precisely what we'll spend the first 20 to 25 minutes going through. Earlier in September and October, we conducted a research of over 1,000 Australian men occupying white-collar professional jobs across Australia. The reason why we did that was because we realized that in order for us to really change the landscape when it comes to diversity and inclusion, everybody needs to be involved. And we saw directly that companies who actually actively engage men, 96% of those companies see great impact from diversity and inclusion initiatives, whereas only 30% of companies saw an impact when they do not intentionally and meaningfully engage male allies, particularly in their gender initiatives. So with that in mind, and combined with a lot of the anecdotes we've been hearing from clients and industry peers, is that there seems to be a little bit of a fear and nervousness when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and everybody is looking for a way forward and how we can have those conversations in a very constructive way. So with that, we conducted the research and uncovered their true sentiment, men's true sentiment towards the DEI landscape at the moment, and actually got some really fascinating and sometimes confronting outcomes today, which provides a great foundation for some really provocative discussion, which I'm looking forward to with Michael and Ingrid later. And that lived experience is a really critical component when it comes to allyship, and that's something that we look forward to unpacking with Michael and Ingrid too. As I mentioned, we'll be opening up for Q&A throughout the session, so please make sure that you do pop your questions in the Q&A function, and our team will also be moderating that. When we conducted the research, we really set out to uncover the true sentiment of men's perception about gender equity and versus the reality that we're looking today. And we uncovered some of the motivators and barriers that prevents them from actively and meaningfully engage in the DEI initiatives. So firstly, I want to unpack what we found around men's sentiments towards gender equality. The perception amongst men is that 80% of Australian men actually believe that gender equality affects all of us and that something needs to be done. However, 1 in 3 men believe that gender equality initiatives are not their responsibility. So what that tells us is that something needs to be done, but it shouldn't or doesn't need to be done by us. 26% feel that men and women aren't supposed to be equal, which is absolutely fascinating to hear that that is the sentiment. And what we also saw was that 48% of Australian men currently feel fatigued from gender equality initiatives. We also saw that 45% believe that men and women are already treated equally, and that if women fall behind, men aren't to blame, but rather it could be down to the lack of drive or motivation of women. So on one hand, we've got about 28% of men who feels that men and women don't actually have to be equal, and we've got 45% feeling that men and women are treated equally already. We saw that 50% of men believe that reverse discrimination is actually happening, which is really interesting. And so we further unpacked and asked them if that was the reality. When we asked them if their opportunity to advance over the past 2 years and their opportunity in the workplace has changed significantly over the past 2 years, 95% of men actually told us that their working experiences, access to opportunities and promotion and advancement have either not changed significantly or have improved. This is 95% who have told us that it has not changed or improved, whereas over 50% of them have told us that they believe that reverse discrimination is happening. So we can actually, from this, saw a direct contrast between perception versus reality, that the perception that it needs to be a zero-sum game is actually not the case, and that it very often does not actually come at a cost to men, which sometimes can be the perception. We also saw that 34% of men said that their work environment has become more empowering, which is really interesting because we know that when you drive diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and when you create a more inclusive culture, everybody benefits. So we saw that over 1/3 of men actually are experiencing a more empowering workplace. So with that, I wanted to actually touch on some of the perception versus reality and the key takeout we got from this, which is it really, in reality, is not a zero-sum game. When people talk about gender equity and the perception, I think sometimes we have towards, driving equity, people feel that it needs to come at the loss of someone, but we've actually saw directly and specifically that that simply is not the reality. However, the perception is there, and what that leads to is that there's potentially reverse discrimination from a sentiment perspective, and that they feel there's a lot of fatigue around it. We've been talking about it for so long, so that's actually impacting on my opportunities. What this has also told us is that inclusion benefits absolutely everyone. When we create a more equitable, inclusive workplace, everybody benefits, including men. And also there are so many intersectionality around what we're talking about. So it's not a binary conversation, but inclusion absolutely benefits everyone. What is really interesting for us was that usually when we see reaction, it means that change are being felt. So from what we can see, that the mass majority are either feeling or have heard or experiencing, and that gender equity initiatives and discussion have been something that's really real for them, has meant that change are happening and people are feeling and experiencing the change, which all in all is a really positive step in the right direction for us. The second section that we really unpacked is around the motivators. So taking a step further, we wanted to uncover what are some of the motivators and barriers to us engaging men meaningfully. What we found was that 45% of men said that lived experiences are their primary influence for perception on gender issues. And I think that's on one hand not surprising, in a sense that we do hear a lot of people who say that, once I've had a daughter or had a wife, or I saw my sister going through something, that's actually made me more aware and more empathetic around it. Not that it should actually be a prerequisite, but I think what we're seeing here is that that's a reality, that lived experiences is absolutely key to changing perceptions. And that's why I think the session today, we're very keen on engaging in that lived experience conversation with Ingrid and with Michael. We also saw that 65% believe that when colleagues make gender stereotypal comments that are inappropriate, these occurrences have a negative effect on the workplace. So what we wanted to uncover from that is that, are people not seeing or recognizing that certain behaviors and attributes and language can have negative impact, or they agree that there's negative impact, but something's just not being done about it? And what we're seeing is that over 65% believe that it does have a negative effect. 61% of efforts to meet targets for women's career advancement are driven primarily by obligation, as opposed to strong personal conviction. And I want to pause here just for a second for us to let that sink in, that we've got 80% of men who realize that gender equity and inclusion initiatives are critical and important. Yet, if anyone is taking action, 61% of them are driven primarily by obligation. I think there's a lot to unpack there, which we will come to a little bit later. What we further found was that 54% believe that actions and involvement of men are critical to achieving gender equality. 53% of those who do think they can influence think that they only have a minor impact. And 22% of men think that their influence would have a critical impact. And this, once again, is really interesting, that what we're hearing from men is that they do not believe that they can have a significant impact to others, which, if you draw that back into what we opened the session with, that is 96% of companies saw more significant impact and results when they engage men versus 30%. So the drastic contrast, the reality perception, there's a lot of disconnect there. And I think a lot needs to be done and actually bring awareness to men around the critical importance that they can play as part of this. I saw that we've just got a question through. Is that 34% linked to DEI initiatives, though, or just a general stats from people who have replied? I'll probably need to go back to what that 34% referred to a little bit later, but thank you for the question, and please make sure that they continue to pop them through, and we'll walk through them as we go. 37% are keen to participate in gender equality initiatives together with and for the encouragement of others. So what that indicates is that men are actually keen to participate in a peer-to-peer environment, and people don't really want to do it alone. They want to do it together with others. 45% said that gender equality training would be good for team development, and 41% says that gender equality training would be good for their own professional development. And I think this is really interesting, because sometimes we do hear conversations, sometimes we do wonder that ourselves too, that, do trainings and learning experiences actually help shift the dial, or do they not? And I think what we've seen here is that it needs to be a combination of structured training as well as sharing of lived experience from your peers. A quick summary around this is the focus of diversity, equity, and inclusion movement need to actually shift away from the role of women to role of men. And I really believe that from all the work that we've done across the globe, this is not unique to gender initiatives. When we drive diversity and inclusion, a lot of the focus has predominantly being on what the underrepresented group can do, but not what the dominant majorities can do. And I think it's really time for us to think about, if we truly want to see progress happen and progress not stalled, how do we meaningfully activate allyship? And I think the research results today actually gave us a lot of great insight around that as a starting point today. We also need to focus on facilitating peer-to-peer sharing of lived experience will be key to change. And that, once again, is a really interesting insight. Very often we see the primary messaging out to people being stats, data, diversity leads to X% increase in innovation. And I think that's all important, but we cannot discount or overlook the importance of sharing lived experiences, hearing from other people's experiences, storytelling, on top of just sharing data and, business practices. Having that component of shared lived experiences from people is absolutely critical and key to change. Lastly, educating men on the critical impact they can have both on a macro and micro scale. If only 22% of them feel that they can't have a critical impact, then only 22% of them would actually be engaged because they think they can make an impact. So how do we reframe the conversation and the role of men to play from a passive participating, supporting ally to an active champion that's driving change? And that shift, we think, from what we've learned from this research, will be absolutely critical as we enter the next chapter. So with that, I'd love to open the floor up for additional Q&As, but also at this point, probably invite Michael and Ingrid to share initial thoughts, reactions, and emotions towards the survey result.
Thanks, Sarah. I mean, a great summary. And my initial reactions is I'm not surprised, because as a female in the workforce, I can feel it. And I feel it's especially more so during COVID because, we've had less face-to-face interaction. So unfortunately, I'm not surprised. And you sometimes do hear, where the males are feeling, the statistic of the males feeling discriminated against the other way, or reverse discrimination. You do hear the subtle remarks, oh, that was another diversity hire. So when I hear that and then see this research, it kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not surprised. There are findings from this research that certainly are disappointing, especially given it's 2021 right now, and everything we've been through. But it helps actually validate that there is still a strong gender inequality happening here in Australia. There is something that we do need to address and need to fix, and start feeling comfortable talking about a very uncomfortable thing if we want to see the needle move here. But some of those findings, again, not surprising, but still disappointing.
Yeah. And what did you find the most disappointing, and what did you find the most uplifting?
Ingrid, do you want to go first, or?
You go first and then I'll go next.
I mean, that specific question around that women should be treated differently to men. I don't know the exact wording of it, but that men and women should not be equal in that sense. That question, the fact that you saw anyone agree to that statement is disappointing. And I'm quite shocked even at that level, with that sort of blunt of a question, you got the engagement rate that you did, or the score that you did there. And that's very eye-opening. But I think it's also honest, and again, validating that this is the landscape of gender inequality that we're living in Australia. What I do see lifting, though, are the high scores around men who believe that that putting more focus into this and putting more training into this and development into this will move the needle, and they're on board to support and get that done. Some of the data was contradicting, like you said, or contrasting, which is interesting, but the fact that the sentiment from men, or majority of men, that they believe that this work is important and this education is important, at least we have that going for us.
Yeah, exactly. And I think at this point, I also want to share just further information around the sample profile and the context and the background of the research. All the details breakdowns are actually in the research report, which you can download from our website, thedreamcollective.com.au. But I do want to take a moment to share here because it might just help add a bit more context and color to our discussion here. So out of the 1,000 men that we surveyed here in Australia, they were spread across New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, SA, WA, and ACT. What we also saw is that it's pretty much a sort of bell curve in terms of the age and generation split as well. We got Zoomers, which is Gen Z, we got Millennials, Generation X, baby boomers, and silent generation, who are the 76-year-old plus. And then in terms of the work status, what we actually did was making sure that there's actually equal or proportionate representation from each of the career levels. So being top management, senior, middle management, first line manager, and employee and workers. And business sizes, we also surveyed across 3 different types of businesses, which is large enterprises, and that's quantified by 300 plus employees, SMBs, and then micro businesses. Industries, we've got a pretty even split and diverse mix as well, whilst we've got quite a significant split and pull from IT and technology sector, because that's the sector that we really wanted to make sure that this representation of and in. We do have manufacturing, retail, professional services, healthcare, education, financial services, public administration, transport, construction, even arts and recreation included as part of that. So a really broad and wide representation and representative data set that was used. And that was conducted in an online self-paced environment. I think it's really interesting because we actually had debates around whether we should actually conduct focus group as well. And people do say that, you are most honest with your keyboards. And I think from what we saw in the research result, that's definitely something that we uncovered too. And so I want to circle back to the fatigue that came out. If over 50% of men are feeling fatigued around DEI discussions and initiatives, what can we do to actually overcome that? Because when people are fatigued, they disengage. So Michael and Ingrid, what's your view on that?
I can go. I think just action it then, just help and be the ally and take the action. Let's stop talking about it. If they're truly aware and understand these facts and these issues and the barriers for women in IT or in leadership roles, any role really, then help and take action.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm fatigued with it too. And I think it's because that the needle isn't moving. So to talk about something over and over again, but see no progress, of course, you're going to get fatigued from it. But I think once we start seeing progress and movement, and we go to the next stage and the next level of progress, you won't see that fatigue. You'll see more engagement. But we just keep on saying the same thing over and over again. Yeah, people are going to disconnect and disengage and be like, this is pointless. We've tried for years and nothing's working. So you're just saying the same thing over again. So we have to keep on moving the needle and moving forward. And with that, like Ingrid said, with that lack of progress, it leads to fatigue and leads to disengagement. So I'm not shocked by that.
And what do you think is the best way for companies and businesses to overcome that? Because I think that could potentially stall progress.
Yeah, and like with any goal, you do need to measure. And I know when we measure these sorts of, diversity, goals or numbers, it is quite confronting, and sometimes it can feel like, well, is this reverse discrimination? But, you know, with any KPI or measurement, you need to track it. And so number one, like any goal, is tracking it, and it keeps all the eyes and ears on it, especially at a leadership level. And I've found that when we do track those sorts of numbers, although sometimes it is uncomfortable to discuss in you know, boardrooms or in informal meetings, it keeps everyone focused. And, you know, we're all mature professionals. And so whether you're male or female, you can all come together and look at the numbers and agree on what actions you need to do to move the needle. So, you know, unfortunately, I do think, you know, you need to measure it, but also I agree with some of the actions you suggested at the end there, Sarah, which is definitely the training and enablement. And, you know, the ideas I had, not only training the women, because we have a lot of women leadership programs or women courses, but, you know, what about doing the same for the men, or doing it combined? Maybe it can be a core agenda item in leadership courses or in technical courses that we have for our folk in our industry. But having it as an agenda item in these training and enablement courses, I think would also help.
Excellent. And I know that both of you have had quite intimate personal experiences around allyship, you know, and conviction. So, Michael, I might start with you. What's been your experiences and journey being an ally to female talent in the workplace, and what's been your personal experience?
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, taking a step back, that comment around lived experiences resonates very much with me. And being an HR leader in human resources in the entirety of my career, being, you know, 19 years plus, women have always been an inspirational part of my career. And if anything, every role I've had in my career, I've had a female leader. So that in itself created, you know, my strong allyship ethos. But through the lived experiences, I think about how my mother raised me. I think about how my sister and I engage. I think about, you know, how my wife and I engage with each other, and, you know, having these strong women advocates and leaders in your life organically make you a stronger ally. So for me, being in the role that I'm in and through my lived experiences, you know, to me, it's like I read these comments, it's a no-brainer to me, right? Because I was trained and brought up to think that, okay, we're hiring the person with the best skill set, not by gender. We're hiring the people and creating a work environment that's equal because it's the right thing to do. And perhaps maybe I'm a little bit more self-aware of my own biases, being raised and taught and groomed by female leaders. You know, my allyship towards women comes more naturally, I think, than that comment in your research around feeling obligated that you have. I completely disagree with that sentiment. It's not something that you have to do, it's something that you should do. And I could talk to hours around why it's beneficial to have more women in leadership, why it's better for your culture, why it's better for your business as well. But it certainly should not be an obligation or a tick the box, I've hit my quota. And if any company builds a DIB program based around hitting quotas, my recommendation is you shouldn't have a DIB program. You should be focusing on fixing your culture. So for me, allyship is, in my role, is around ensuring that I can do my best with my voice and the sphere of influence I have as a head of HR for JAPAC and an HR leader within Spotify to create a inclusive environment free of discrimination and bridge that gender gap as best as possible. From a hiring perspective, from a pay gap perspective, anything that I can do where I see a gap happening, you know, my natural tendency as an HR leader is to fix that, not because I'm obligated to do so, but because it's the right thing to do. So, and I thank everyone I listed in my lived experiences and my prior managers for me being able to think like that. Because clearly through the research, there are a lot of men out there that don't, and that's disappointing. Yeah, that's kind of my view on allyship there. Ingrid?
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. I think, we need to keep talking about it, but we need to action as well. I mean, one of the thoughts as you were talking, Michael, was the other part to it is having role models. So, if, the younger potential allies had the role models of, the more experienced allies, that, like how you described, Michael, that was a natural ability for you because you had strong females that were advocates for you. Similarly for us. So if our male allies, were role models that groomed all the younger ones that came, up the chain or, in broader roles, then it becomes more natural for them. So the role modeling, I think, is vital. If we think about how we grew up as children, we want to grow up to be like our heroes or our role models. And so I think an element of allyship, we need to have that inspirational role model to look towards.
Yes, and a couple of questions has come through, particularly around the area of talent as well as culture. So I might start with Michael, with you first. Around, there's a war on talent. So what are your tips to support this during this time where talent is so competitive?
Yeah, you have to be an attractive employer where talent wants to come and work for you. So the question becomes, if you want to win that war for talent, the playing field is much different than it was 10 years ago. Talent now, especially if you're focused on millennial talent or Gen Z talent, they're not looking for who pays the most, and I'm going to go there. Compensation is no longer one of the top priorities. It's more about culture. It's more about the benefits you provide your employees, the health and well-being you provide to your employees, and what sort of culture and values you're driving. And what we're finding at Spotify is the reason why people join Spotify is not only because they're passionate about our product and our platform, but they know about how we as an HR team treat our people, what sort of benefits we give to people, what's our values around work-life balance, family balance. They read it in the news, they hear it from other people, and that's what attracts them to join Spotify. So if you want to win the war for talent, I would look firstly at what does your current internal talent look like and how engaged are they and how happy are they? Because the higher levels of engagement and happiness you have within your current teams and your organization is a good indicator that you're driving really strong culture. Right. And when you drive strong culture and people go through that interview process, they're going to feel that. And they're going to want to be a part of that winning team versus, going into an organization where that feeling isn't there. So for me, the war on talent is all about focusing on what's best for them and not focusing on what's best for the company anymore. And I think the pandemic has completely shifted the war for talent as well, especially as we become more hybrid and more remote. The war for talent has opened up significantly. So how are you adapting to the pandemic changes and keeping up? Because any company that says we can't wait for the pandemic to be over so we could go back to normal, I would not recommend thinking that way, because there is no normal after the pandemic. What companies should be thinking about is how do we adapt ourselves based on the learnings from this pandemic to support a new workforce, because we're all working in a different way. So for me, the war for talent is extremely complex, but again, it goes back to how strong is your culture, how strong is your brand, how strong are your values? That's what people are looking for. And that's what we find through all of our recruiting data of candidates we hire, but also candidates that we don't hire. So I think that's what I would be focusing on. Ingrid, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. It does come at the end of the day, people are everything to an organization and teams. And if you look after them, you understand them, you validate, you listen. And then, once you've done that, you take action. And, I agree with the values as well. Use your values to remind people to bring it back to a culture that the company's, been made for, really. And that will help realign some of the noise that perhaps might be coming through. But, talking about it, I think this forum is excellent because, seeing the hard facts, but now, we may not necessarily fix these sort of stats overnight, but at least we're making a start to talk about it and say some things that are quite, uncomfortable. But, let's group together, in different forums to start taking action, whether it's within our organisations or within these sorts of networks or external networks we may be part of, is starting to talk about it and influence and action through those angles.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that we have been observing from the clients that we work with as well. I think across the board, there's a real change required for clients to shift thinking about something as a benefit to a candidate expectation. So things about value alignment, leadership, diversity representation, inclusive culture, those things that were once perceived as nice to have, not core to my decision making, has completely been shifted. Now that's where people start. And I think that's where the tension that I see companies need to get their head around. It's like you start there first, not that it comes later. And so I think that's a really interesting observation. And I think that comes to the culture piece, which leads to us to another question. How do you identify the root cause of the culture issue, and what is the first step you take to address that? We might start with Michael, and we'll go to Ingrid.
Mm-hmm. I think, to address culture issues, first and foremost, you have to understand what that issue is. And before you address anything, I would recommend listening to your people, giving them the microphone, giving them a safe place to voice their opinions and concerns about culture, about how the company is going, whether that's in the form of your annual people surveys or small roundtables, depending on how big you are. Listening to your people first and acknowledging that, and then taking action from the feedback of your people and showing your people, hey, we're taking action on this, will help drive and evolve culture, right? But culture is such a complex thing because it's not static. Your culture, everyone's culture, should constantly be evolving. As our CEO always says, if our culture isn't changing and evolving and moving forward, that means the company isn't moving forward. So a company shouldn't strive to keep their culture the way it is, because then you're not moving forward with especially companies that are growing. Companies that are growing should ensure that they shepherd and groom their culture in the right direction, but accept the fact that culture will evolve and change. But if that culture is leading towards a more toxic turn, based on a lot of what we're talking about here, where you have organizations that are high in discrimination and unsafe environments, taking action and showing your people as a leader, I'm serious about this, I'm taking action on this, I'm listening to you, you're going to get strong followership from your people. The worst thing you can do is ask your people for their opinions and advice and then not do anything, because then they feel unheard. They feel not valued. And that's when they start picking up the phone with recruiters and saying, you know what, I will take that interview. Our job at Spotify, if we want to retain our people, my number one job is to make sure that when a recruiter calls our people, their answer is, thank you, we appreciate it, but we love Spotify, I'm not ready to leave yet, right? And we do that by creating an environment for our people so that they don't have a reason to leave. And I think we've done a good job there. Yeah.
And Ingrid?
Yeah, I mean, it's still of the theme, don't be afraid to talk about it, because you hear and keep in touch with your people. And so, one of the examples I have in Adobe is Adobe holds a week-long Adobe for All Week, which is an internal diversity and inclusion week full of events globally to hear employee stories. And they typically are within all the diversity pillars that we all know. It's not just about gender, it's about people with disability or abilities. It's about cultural heritage. And so because I'm in my first year with Adobe, that was just empowering for me as a staff member, employee, and it really, really engaged me into the organization and made me realize, wow, Adobe really does look after its people. And, you know, there are tears, there are laughs, and people are really vulnerable in telling their stories as, you know, staff people. And, you know, you don't normally see that in the work context. And so Adobe is, you know, really core to the values of being genuine, being involved, and having excellence. And, you know, when you hear your colleagues talk authentically and tell vulnerable stories, it really draws out that, wow, this is a company that does, you know, have diversity and inclusion. And because that's drawn out, it gives you, it makes you feel liberated to be able to speak your mind, to be able to give the feedback. But also, I would say, if you're going to do that, you know, work through with your colleagues and with your leaders of how you could help make the change. You know, don't just give the feedback, get involved and make the changes happen yourself.
Great. And Ingrid, off the back of that, I want to unpack your personal experiences a little bit. I know that going through your career, you probably would have either sort of benefited or worked with mentors and sponsors and allies, particularly that's helped you take that advancement or created access. Can you share a little bit more about that and what's been your experiences around allyship?
Yeah, I mean, I did a business degree, but I majored in IT. And so that's how I got involved in the IT industry. And then, but I got employed by one of the most IT technology companies, IBM, as a business degree. So I think getting involved in an IT company early, I was very lucky that a lot of my allies, it was quite balanced actually. It was female, male balanced in my early career as a technical developer. But as I progressed in my career, as I got more experience, became more of a leader, in particular in sales leadership roles, I found my allies were typically more male. And logically, you can see why, because, you know, there are more males at the leadership levels. But, you know, some of the experience I had was when I did have a female mentor or ally, she would then have to introduce me to her male allies or her male network to be a male ally for me. And so I found that quite interesting, reflecting back, but it actually worked. But as time went by, and these stats really do demonstrate, I do feel like it's gotten worse, because as time has grown and as I've you know, evolved in my career, I'm finding it's really just all male allies. Now, I do catch up with the female allies, but it's typically the stronger sponsors and allies are the males. And they, you know, have been very influential in opening up avenues where I could have discussions on what roles I could take on. And, you know, and they're typically senior, you know, sales IT roles. But I wouldn't have had those opportunities if I weren't aware of certain, you know, environments, certain people I needed to talk to. I still went through the same recruitment process, but, you know, I needed to network more to ensure that I did have advocates. Because one of the great tips I got was, when your name comes up, you know, you want people to say, yeah, I know Ingrid, and I actually do think she's ready for this role, or I do think Ingrid can do this sort of role. And so, you know, expanding your allyship as well as networks, you're managing your own career and your destiny. You're not necessarily relying on these people, but you're having, you know, a broader forum to have a spotlight on you. And so, you know, typically those male allies have helped have conversations where I've not been in the room. But, you know, and Michael, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, you know, my male colleagues, they would probably naturally do that. It felt really uncomfortable for me very early on. It felt like I was stalking people. But, you know, I found those allies, they were actually really happy to help. But then over time, what happened was it also became a reverse mentoring situation as well, because I would share some of my situation of what I'm experiencing, and, they wouldn't have known that if they didn't hear that from me. And so it broadened their perspective as well.
Excellent. And I just love hearing personal lived experiences and stories. And it's just, I love just the realness of these conversations. I think those are really powerful. We've got a question through. I'm curious to know if 40% plus feel that training would help. What do we think that training would entail and or might look like? I might let the both of you share what's been really powerful and effective in your experiences, and we can share some insights what we have from the Dream Collective too.
So, and this is in Spotify's partnership with the Dream Collective, and something I've talked about with the Dream Collective team, going back to listening to your people first. When you decide to roll out training content, the most important thing is that it needs to be relevant to the needs of your organization, right? Just rolling out a generic DIB training content and saying I've done DIB training is not impactful if it doesn't address the issues. So tailoring that training content to the issues and situations that are happening within your company and your teams, I think is very powerful, because then it creates relevance and then people engage more with it. I think the other thing that is really good about training is that it provides that platform to talk more about this very important topic that isn't talked about on a day-to-day basis, when it should be. It should be talked about not within just specific times of the year, but throughout one-on-ones and team meetings, and the importance of culture and diversity, inclusion, and belonging. But trainings is another outlet for people to actually sit there and talk about what's working well and what's not, as you discuss really difficult topics like discrimination, harassment, gender inequality. And if you have trainings and the right environment and the safe environment for people to be their authentic selves and speak freely in these trainings, you as leaders and HR leaders will learn so much more about your organization and the pulse of your people. And then from there, you can adapt and change your mindset to be a better leader, because you've heard your people, you've heard directly from your people in training platforms such as this. So trainings are super, super powerful for many reasons, but like just sending out generic training and saying, guys, we're doing DIB training because we have to, because the HR person says we have to. Again, don't waste your time. Have a staff meeting instead and talk about business, because that's not going to get the results you want.
Yeah.
The Dream Collective, in my consultation with them, said the most powerful thing to me that I've shared back with my leaders is, in their research, DIB strategies being forced and driven by HR most times do not work. It needs to be an organic thing that comes from the advocacy of the leaders in a very authentic way, but also all from a grassroots exercise from the people. So to drive strong DIB culture, it needs to come from the business and the people together. And, again, training and things like that, where HR can support you with, is one piece of it, but leading it and actually living through it, it's the job of the managers and the leaders to do, not an HR KPI. Yeah.
Yeah, just, in relation to that, and this, obviously, typically large IT enterprises or enterprises would have like a D&I, task force or council or something like that. But I would say, yeah, definitely, if you don't have it already, have, a person or a leader that is going to drive a D&I initiative, the initiatives and the goals you need to set. Have that network, and typically, in Adobe, we have the employee network, and we're divided into diversity pillars for women, for pride, for people with access and disabilities. So, definitely structure the organization so there is those sorts of pillars. Generally get the employees involved, which is always hard because, the employees have a day job. But when you do have the passion behind it and you're hearing from the people, the action can happen. And, but that's where I say, come back to the measurements and the numbers. And this is something we're working on in doing is, just having that understanding. So when we are talking about it, we can be factual and we're not having that unconscious bias, which can potentially move into, discrimination. And the other one I would say is, well, I said it before actually, is the role modeling. I feel because of, unfortunately, the pandemic and we're not seeing each other as much, it's hard to have the role models. And I do think perhaps the statistics have really gotten bad because we're not together as much. And so we've become habitual in probably what our original habits were, because we're not in the office, we're not around everyone in the workplace, so we do need to have the role models to see it, but also be trained. And I am an advocate of, you're already preaching to the converted, so we need to train our male colleagues. And, and if it's in a way, it doesn't have to be directly just for diversity and this awareness program. It can be part of some overall training, that's onboarding training or leadership training, but make it a BAU item in the training and enablement for your organization.
I think both of you actually absolutely hit the nail on this head with a couple of things. I think, Ingrid, to your point about BAU, one of the biggest things that we see from company is that they see trainings or learning experiences as a one-off, we've done that once, so good, great, move on. But without realizing that it's ongoing, it's almost like car maintenance. It's not something you do like once, like every 4 or 5 years. It's ongoing and it needs to be BAU. So I think that's one of the things that I'll say around the training, just the right sentiment and attitude towards it. The other thing is learner driven. So Michael's absolutely right, that our recommendation as we work with customers, let it be Spotify or Adobe in this case, that we start with listening. So really understand deeply what are the learners requiring, because a lot of times we just think about and focus on what we want to train people on, and it's trainer, HR leader, business driven, not learner driven. What do they actually want to learn? What do they think is going to create an impact? And when we've listened first, created mechanisms and solutions that responded to that, the level of engagement you get is absolutely incredible. So I would say that in our experiences, that really about 70% of the training success relies on what happens outside of that training. So when it comes to the 30% of actually what happens, taking a slightly different approach to training or learning, what we really call it is learning experiences, because that's actually more empowering from a learner perspective as well. So one thing that a couple of tips I'll share is that, one, actually invite conversations. So to Michael's point, that training is valuable when it creates a platform and a foundation for facilitated discussion. That's where the richness of your insight will come from. Sometimes we see clients really wanting materials, toolkit and assets and guidebooks, and it's all great and like content is fantastic, but really what's going to give you the most value is in the discussion. So don't be afraid, don't feel that you're not getting value if your training is like all talk. Like that's actually the value, because that's hard to come by. And the other thing I would say is that taking a more slightly approach, if we were talking about inclusive leadership, and especially when we conduct learning experiences and training for a senior context, a lot of times what we do is that we invite more the junior members to come, obviously with proper psychological safety and preparation and briefing, but we invite a junior panel to come and share their lived experiences with their leadership team. And that, once again, is so powerful. So I would suggest that, bear in mind that what makes a training effective and powerful, 70% of it exists outside of the actual training itself, and also looking inside, making sure that it's listening driven, it's learner driven, and also creating different layers of hierarchy. So different types and a diversity of voices can be heard is absolutely critical. So before we wrap up, Ingrid and Michael, do you have any final thoughts around allyship that you want to share with the audience today?
I think for me, allyship is, whether you're male or female, I think you have to have allyship if you want to go in certain areas of your career. And if it happens to be, you know, those leaders are male. And so with that, the organizations that you work for really need to be conscious of it and really make awareness to these male allies, what actions they can take to help equality for their women in the workforce.
Yeah, for me, it's if you're looking to go down the allyship path, it's more about, you know, I think first understanding and listening to your people in your workforce and how you could help, understanding your blind spots and being aware of your blind spots before you become an ally is also important as well, and educating yourself. You know, we call it allyship programs, and I hate the word program because I don't think it should be a program.
Yeah.
It should just be being a great leader, right? Is being an ally. Just like all of Ingrid's allies, I don't think they signed up to be into their allyship program to take Ingrid under their wing and be a strong ally. They were just great leaders and mentors.
Agree.
To Ingrid. It was an organic thing.
Yeah.
And it has to be authentic, right? If you want to be an ally, it has to be authentic because you want to create that change, not because, again, you're obligated to do so, because people will see right through that and it'll just blow up in your face too. And for everyone out there that's listening to this, you know, and when we talk about gender inequality, and if you're someone in a hiring position or running a business, it's not only the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do as well if you want to increase engagement and leadership within your organization. All the data shows that women lead better than men. They lead democratically better. They are better with transformational leadership. They're better as role models. They listen better. They lead with empathy and vulnerability more. This isn't my opinion. This is research and studies done globally that time over time always prove that women have stronger skill sets in these areas, all of which conveniently qualify and define what a great leader means. You know, research was also done that companies going through the pandemic with female leadership are going through the pandemic much better from a mental state and health and well-being state perspective from their employees than male leaders navigating through this pandemic. So what am I saying is we have to bridge the gap of gender inequality here, but by doing so, we need more female leadership representation, specifically in Australia. And if we could bridge that gap, then companies will perform better. Revenue will increase, employee engagement will increase, that war for talent, you will start winning. So it's not a obligated, I have to do this because it's a KPI. It's you should be doing this because it's best for your business. And I think Australia has a long way to go in that gender gap. And this is also my last point is, I don't think reverse discrimination is happening, and I'll be provocative here. It's not reverse discrimination. So any white male thinking it is, it's not. And if you feel that, it's because there's such an imbalance right now in the playing field. And that reverse discrimination you're feeling isn't reverse discrimination. It's the efforts and intent to create a more balanced and equal playing field for women. And once we get to that 50-50 equal playing field, then things will change completely. But until we get there, because there's such a big gap, I understand why people call it reverse discrimination. I just want to be clear that it's not. We have to advocate for women. We have to give those opportunities to women because there simply aren't enough today. So I'd like to end with that from my perspective. And I think if we see more women in leadership roles, a lot of the things we hear in the news around harassment, discrimination, I think a lot of those will go away as well. So that's why as an HR leader, I'm an advocate for all of this. So that's me.
Excellent. And I think, Michael, that was such a powerful close. You wrapped up perfectly.
Totally.
So thank you so much. And I think everything that you talked about in terms of authenticity and having role model, you know, the time to act is here and it's now. And that's why we've actually created and designed this Better Together online learning experiences to actually help companies who want to take the first step in creating allyship or providing awareness and education training around allyship to your employees, actually a free resources to access. So this allyship program will be designed with some of these insights and research stats in mind, and you can actually access that and sign up for early access from our website. And so thank you all so much. I know that we're coming to time, so fantastic to have all of you joining today. Please make sure that you stay in touch with our global community either through LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. And thank you all so much for a fantastic discussion and engagement today. Finally, a great and huge sincere heartfelt thanks to Michael and Ingrid for sharing your insights and experiences with all of us. Thank you and see you later.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.